This story begins with a seemingly ordinary cat named Shadow, a sleek black feline with piercing green eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own. Shadow wasn't your average house cat, though. From the moment he was found as a stray kitten, it was clear he was special. He had an uncanny ability to observe, almost as if he understood everything happening around him. Unlike other cats that spent their days lounging or chasing after toys, Shadow was always alert, quietly watching, studying every movement, every sound. His owner, Officer Maria, was a seasoned police officer. Maria adopted Shadow after finding him on a cold, rainy night near the precinct. At first, she thought Shadow was just a lucky charm, a comforting companion after long, stressful days on the job. But as time went on, she began to notice something remarkable. Shadow wasn't just a passive observer. He had an instinct for danger. He would pick up on things even Maria couldn't see. Subtle changes in behavior, odd patterns that others overlooked. One evening, while Maria was reviewing case files at home, Shadow jumped onto the table and started pawing at a photo in the middle of the stack. It was a suspect the police had been tracking for weeks, someone connected to a potential large-scale crime. Maria laughed at first, thinking Shadow was just being playful. But Shadow wouldn't stop. He stared at the photo, his tail flicking with an intensity Maria had never seen before. It was as if he was trying to say, "This is important, pay attention." Maria brushed it off, but the next day at work, she couldn't shake the feeling. She mentioned Shadow's odd behavior to her partner, who jokingly said, "Maybe your cat's onto something." They laughed, but it planted a seed in her mind. Over the following weeks, Maria started noticing more. Shadow seemed to be drawn to the case files, always circling the table when she worked late into the night. It was almost as if he knew something was wrong, that something big was coming. Then came the night that changed everything. Maria had just returned home after a particularly tough shift when she noticed Shadow acting strangely. He paced back and forth, his ears twitching, his tail swishing anxiously. He let out sharp, urgent meows, unlike anything she'd heard before. It wasn't long before Maria realized he wasn't just being fussy, he was trying to tell her something. Shadow kept running to the door, looking back at her, as if urging her to follow. Maria couldn't ignore it any longer. Shadow's strange behavior felt too deliberate, too calculated. That was the moment she started to wonder. Was it possible that this cat, her quiet and clever companion, might actually be the key to cracking a case no one else could solve? Shadow's peculiar behavior wasn't something Maria could shake off, especially after that night. Her instincts as an officer told her there was more to it, and she began paying closer attention to her feline companion. Around the same time, her precinct was facing one of its biggest challenges, a series of suspicious activities pointing toward a potentially devastating event. The details were murky. There were whispers about a highly organized group planning something catastrophic, but the leads were scarce, and time was running out. The police had intercepted fragments of information, cryptic phone calls, unusual patterns of movement around critical locations in the city, and a sense of unease in the community. They suspected the group was planning something big, but no one could pinpoint exactly what or where it would happen. The team was frustrated. Every lead seemed to hit a dead end, and the pressure from city officials was mounting. Maria had been heavily involved in the case, spending countless hours combing through surveillance footage, trying to piece together a puzzle with far too many missing pieces. One night, as she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by maps and reports, Shadow leapt onto the table. His green eyes scanned the clutter as though he were analyzing it himself. He nudged one particular map, his paw resting on a circle Maria had drawn around an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Maria couldn't help but chuckle at the coincidence. "What do you think, Shadow? Is this the spot?" she asked jokingly. But Shadow's reaction was anything but playful. He sat there, staring at the map with unwavering focus. His behavior was so oddly deliberate that it sent a chill down Maria's spine. It was as if he understood the gravity of the situation. The warehouse had already been flagged as a potential location for illegal activity, but there hadn't been enough evidence to justify a full operation. It was well guarded, with no clear way for officers to gather intel without being spotted. Maria mentioned Shadow's odd fixation on the warehouse during a briefing at the precinct, half expecting her colleagues to dismiss it as silly. To her surprise, one of the senior detectives, known for his unconventional methods, took an interest. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we've used dogs in operations before. Why not a cat? They're small, silent, and can get into places we can't." The room erupted in laughter, but the idea lingered. The more they discussed it, the more it began to make sense. Shadow's natural agility and quiet demeanor made him the perfect candidate to infiltrate a place humans couldn't. At first, Maria was hesitant. The idea of sending her beloved cat into such a dangerous situation felt absurd, even reckless. But as the team struggled to find other options, it became clear that Shadow might be their best chance. They decided to test him in a controlled environment. The precinct set up a mock scenario, recreating the warehouse's layout using boxes and barriers. Shadow navigated the course effortlessly, slipping through tight spaces and climbing to high vantage points with ease. He seemed to understand what was expected of him, almost as if he were born for the role. As the team prepared for the real mission, they equipped Shadow with a tiny, lightweight camera attached to a custom harness. The plan was simple. Shadow would enter the warehouse, explore the area, and gather visual intel on the group's operations. It was risky, but the potential payoff was too great to ignore. The night of the operation arrived, and the tension was palpable. The officers waited in a surveillance van parked a safe distance from the warehouse, watching the live feed from Shadow's camera. Maria held her breath as she released him near the perimeter. Shadow moved with purpose, his sleek black fur blending into the shadows. He was completely silent, his movements calculated and precise. Inside the warehouse, Shadow's camera revealed a labyrinth of crates, equipment, and people. The officers watched in awe as the little cat maneuvered through obstacles, climbing onto beams and slipping into spaces no human could access. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. The group was assembling something dangerous, and they were on a tight timeline. Shadow had uncovered the intel they desperately needed, and it was now up to the officers to act quickly. But even in that moment, one thing was clear. Shadow wasn't just a pet anymore. He had become an integral part of the team, a tiny hero helping to uncover a plot that could have ended in disaster. The night of the mission was one filled with anticipation and tension. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a shadowy fortress against the dim city skyline. The team was ready to act, but the first move belonged to the smallest member of their unit, Shadow. In the surveillance van parked down the street, officers huddled around screens showing the live feed from the tiny camera strapped to the sleek black cat. Maria sat closest, her hands gripping the edge of the console, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a police operation anymore, it was personal. Shadow, as if sensing the importance of the task, moved with precision and focus. The officers had positioned him near a small gap in the fence that surrounded the warehouse, one too narrow for a person to slip through. Shadow darted inside with practiced ease, his movements as quiet as a whisper. The camera attached to his harness provided a clear view of his surroundings, and the officers watched intently as he made his way toward the main building. The warehouse grounds were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that spoke of hidden dangers. Shadow paused often, his ears twitching, his eyes scanning every corner. Each time he moved forward, it was deliberate, as if he could feel the weight of the mission on his tiny shoulders. As he approached the entrance to the building, the officers caught their first real glimpse of activity. Two men were standing guard, their low voices carrying just enough to reveal snippets of their conversation. Shadow crouched low, slipping behind a pile of crates stacked near the door. His camera caught a view of the guards, who seemed oblivious to his presence. One of them gestured toward a truck parked nearby, saying something about a final shipment, that needed to be ready by dawn. Maria leaned closer to the screen, straining to hear every word. This was the first solid clue they'd had about the group's plans, and it came from Shadow's sharp instincts and ability to get where no one else could. Inside the warehouse, the environment was a maze of activity. The camera showed rows of crates, machinery, and equipment that looked suspiciously like parts for a large explosive device. Shadow moved carefully, his tiny frame allowing him to slip through narrow spaces and avoid detection. At one point, he froze mid-step, his head tilting as he listened to footsteps approaching. The tension in the van was palpable as everyone held their breath, watching Shadow remain perfectly still. The footsteps passed, and Shadow resumed his exploration. The camera feed revealed more than anyone had expected. In one section of the warehouse, a group of people was gathered around a table, discussing plans. Blueprints were spread out in front of them, showing detailed diagrams of city infrastructure. Maria's eyes widened as she recognized the location, a major public square that was always bustling with people. The target was clear now, and so was the urgency. The officers couldn't wait any longer. They needed this information to plan their next move, but first, Shadow had to make it back out safely. Shadow's mission wasn't over yet. As he moved further into the warehouse, he encountered what could only be described as the operations nerve center. Computers, communication equipment, and a map marked with red pins indicated the group's key locations and plans. Shadow, as if understanding the importance of this discovery, lingered long enough for the camera to capture everything. The officers in the van frantically took notes and screenshots, knowing this intel was the break they needed. But then, the unthinkable happened. A loud noise, a metal pipe falling to the ground, startled one of the guards nearby. He turned his flashlight toward the crates where Shadow had been moments before. The officers watched in horror as the beam of light swept closer to Shadow's position. Maria's heart raced, her fingers clenched tightly as she whispered under her breath, "Come on, Shadow, move." Shadow, displaying the remarkable calm and agility that had made him the perfect choice for this mission, darted away silently. He climbed onto a high beam, completely out of the guard's line of sight. The officers let out a collective sigh of relief as the guard shrugged and walked away, muttering about stray animals. Shadow, undeterred, continued his journey back toward the exit. The final stretch of the mission was the most critical. Shadow retraced his steps, navigating the maze-like warehouse with the same quiet precision as before. When he reached the gap in the fence where he had first entered, Maria was already waiting on the other side. She crouched low, her arms outstretched, whispering words of encouragement. Shadow darted through the gap and leapt into her arms, his camera still intact and filled with invaluable footage. The mission was a success. Thanks to Shadow, the team now had the evidence they needed to act decisively. The officers sprang into action, coordinating a raid based on the intel gathered by their unlikely hero. As the team prepared to move in, Maria held Shadow close, whispering, "You did it, buddy. You really did it." Shadow's part in the mission was over, but his impact was undeniable. He had not only proven his incredible abilities, but also reminded everyone of the unique bond between humans and animals. Shadow wasn't just a spy. He was a hero in every sense of the word. The police raid was set into motion with urgency, and every officer on the team felt the weight of the moment. The intel Shadow had gathered was clear. This wasn't just a small operation. It was a massive, coordinated plan that could have ended in tragedy if they didn't act quickly. The target was a major public square, and the timeline for the attack was terrifyingly short. There was no room for error. In the early hours of the morning, under the cover of darkness, the team assembled near the warehouse. The officers had mapped out their plan using the footage Shadow had provided, which gave them the precise layout of the building, the location of the guards, and even the central hub of the operation. This was the advantage they'd been missing. Maria stood at the forefront of the group, her mind racing with everything they had to do. She glanced down at Shadow, who was sitting calmly at her feet, as if he understood his job was done. "You've done your part," Maria whispered. "Now it's our turn." The team moved in, their footsteps silent and coordinated. The warehouse was eerily still, the kind of quiet that signaled danger. Using the intel from Shadow's mission, the officers were able to slip past the perimeter guards undetected. Inside, they found the operation exactly as Shadow had revealed: rows of crates filled with equipment, computers displaying their plans, and a group of people huddled near the center, finalizing their next steps. The officers split into teams, each with a specific role. Some were tasked with securing the explosives and dismantling the equipment, while others focused on apprehending the suspects. Maria and her team approached the group at the center, their weapons drawn, but voices calm as they announced themselves. "Police, don't move," she commanded. For a moment, there was chaos, suspects scattering, shouting orders to one another, and even trying to destroy evidence. But the officers were prepared. They acted swiftly, securing the area and arresting everyone involved. Just as the situation seemed under control, a sudden noise cut through the tension, a metallic clang from the far end of the warehouse. Maria's heart sank as she realized they might have missed someone. A man burst from the shadows, clutching a detonator in his hand. He was shouting, his voice frantic, threatening to set off the explosives they hadn't yet secured. The officers froze, their training kicking in as they tried to de-escalate the situation. But the man was desperate, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. And then, in the most unexpected twist, Shadow reappeared. No one had noticed him slip into the warehouse after Maria, but there he was, moving with the same silent confidence as before. He had spotted the man before anyone else, and without hesitation, he darted toward him. The officers watched in stunned silence as Shadow leapt onto a stack of crates and then onto the man's shoulder. The man let out a startled yell, flinching as Shadow clawed at his hand. The detonator fell to the ground with a clatter, sliding out of reach. It was the opening the officers needed. Maria and her team acted instantly, tackling the man and securing the detonator before he could recover. The room was filled with the sound of handcuffs clicking and radios buzzing as the rest of the operation was brought to a close. Maria scooped up Shadow, holding him tightly as she tried to process what had just happened. "You've got to be kidding me," one of the officers said, shaking his head in disbelief. The cat saved the day. Again. With the suspects in custody and the explosives dismantled, the threat was finally neutralized. The officers began the meticulous process of cataloging evidence and clearing the scene, but the tension in the air had been replaced by a sense of relief and awe. Shadow had gone from being an unlikely ally to an undeniable hero. As dawn broke, painting the city in hues of gold and pink, Maria stood outside the warehouse with Shadow in her arms. The quiet of the early morning felt like a stark contrast to the chaos of the night. Shadow, now calm and content, purred softly, as if he knew the danger had passed. Maria smiled, stroking his sleek fur. "You've done more than I ever could have imagined," she said softly. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you." Back at the precinct, word of Shadow's heroics spread quickly. Officers who had been skeptical about using a cat in the operation were now singing his praises. Someone even suggested giving him an honorary badge, a joke that quickly gained traction. But beyond the lighthearted banter was a deep sense of gratitude and respect. Shadow had not only helped solve a critical case, but had also reminded everyone of the power of teamwork, even when that team included a four-legged member. Maria, looking at the stack of paperwork that awaited her, didn't feel the usual dread. Instead, she felt a sense of pride. Shadow had changed everything. Not just the outcome of the case, but the way they viewed what was possible. He had shown them that heroes could come in all shapes and sizes, even with whiskers and a tail. As the dust settled on the case, the significance of what had transpired truly began to sink in. The operation was a resounding success. The warehouse raid not only dismantled a dangerous plot, but also unearthed critical information that helped law enforcement track down and shut down other cells connected to the group. The city was safe, and Shadow's role in making that possible was impossible to ignore. Back at the precinct, the mood was celebratory. Officers who had once laughed at the idea of involving a cat in police work were now calling Shadow a hero. He had earned an almost mythical status among the team. Maria was approached constantly by her colleagues, all of them eager to hear more about Shadow's clever instincts and bravery. The precinct even held a small ceremony to honor Shadow's contribution. A tiny custom-made badge was presented to him, complete with his name engraved on it. The sight of Shadow wearing it, sitting proudly on Maria's desk, brought smiles to everyone's faces. The story of Shadow's heroics didn't stop at the precinct. Word spread quickly, and soon the media caught wind of it. News outlets ran stories about the hero cat who had helped stop a major disaster. Videos of the live footage from Shadow's camera were shared widely, captivating audiences everywhere. People were amazed not just by what Shadow had done, but by how his instincts and actions had outsmarted criminals and helped law enforcement. Social media was flooded with posts celebrating Shadow, with hashtags like Tha's Hero Cat and Shadow the Spy trending for days. Maria, though overwhelmed by the attention, couldn't help but feel proud. Shadow wasn't just her pet anymore. He was a symbol of what could be achieved when humans and animals work together in unexpected ways. But for Maria, it was about more than just the headlines. Shadow had taught her something profound. His ability to sense danger, his courage in the face of threats, and his trust in her as his partner had all been critical to their success. It was a reminder that sometimes solutions to our biggest challenges come from the most unexpected places. Beyond the accolades and media attention, there was a deeper takeaway for the entire team. Shadow had reminded them to think outside the box, to trust their instincts, and to see potential where others might not. In many ways, his involvement had brought the team closer together, giving them a new perspective on how they approached their work. Shadow had not only saved lives, but also inspired the people around him to be better, more observant, more creative, and more open-minded. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be with a famous cat in the mix. Maria continued her work at the precinct, but now she brought Shadow along more often. He became an unofficial member of the team, roaming the station with his tiny badge and keeping a watchful eye on everything. Officers joked that he was their chief of security, but deep down, they all admired him. For Maria, the bond she shared with Shadow grew even deeper. She often thought back to the night she found him as a stray, a little kitten with nowhere to go. She could never have imagined then how important he would become, not just to her, but to so many others. Shadow's story wasn't just about one heroic act. It was about resilience, trust, and the unexpected ways in which even the smallest among us can make a difference. The city remained safe, and the community, inspired by Shadow's story, found new respect for the unique bond between humans and animals. It wasn't just about what Shadow had done, it was about what he represented. In a world often filled with challenges, Shadow proved that heroes can come from anywhere, and courage doesn't have to look the way we expect it to. As Maria sat at her desk one evening, finishing up paperwork from the case, she glanced down at Shadow, who was curled up in his usual spot beside her. She smiled, scratching behind his ears. "You've changed everything," she said softly. Shadow purred, his green eyes flickering open for a moment before closing again. He was back to being just a cat, at least for now. But to Maria, and to everyone else who knew his story, he would always be so much more. If Shadow's incredible story inspired you, let's take a moment to reflect on how we can carry forward its message. Shadow didn't just help save the day, he showed us the value of thinking differently, of seeing potential where others might overlook it, and of trusting in the unexpected. And while Shadow's bravery and intelligence may feel unique, his story reminds us that every animal has something extraordinary to offer. and every human has the power to nurture and bring that potential to light. First, if you love stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales. Shadow's journey is just one example of how animals and humans working together can create something extraordinary, and we're here to share more amazing stories like his. Turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. You never know what kind of inspiring story will be coming your way. But this isn't just about Shadow. It's also about the pets and animals in our own lives. Take a look at the furry friends around you. Maybe they're not out solving crimes, but they're heroes in their own way. Whether it's by offering comfort on tough days, making you laugh when you need it most, or even surprising you with their intelligence and loyalty. We challenge you to take a moment to appreciate their unique talents. Who knows? Your pet might have untapped potential just waiting to shine. If you're thinking about adding a pet to your family, consider adopting from a shelter. Remember, Shadow was just a stray kitten when Maria found him, but with a little love, care, and attention, he became a hero. There are so many animals out there, just like Shadow, waiting for a chance to prove how amazing they can be. By adopting, you're not just giving them a home, you're giving them a second chance to show the world what they're capable of. And if you already have a pet, think about how you can strengthen your bond with them. Training, playing, and simply spending quality time together can uncover talents and deepen the connection you share. Maybe your dog has a knack for agility, or your cat has an uncanny ability to sense your mood. Those small moments of discovery are what make the relationship between humans and animals so special. Another way to make a difference is by supporting organizations that help animals. Whether it's donating to your local animal shelter, volunteering your time, or simply spreading awareness, every effort counts. Together, we can create a world where more animals like Shadow have the chance to shine, to be loved, and to show us just how much they can contribute. Lastly, we'd love to hear from you. Do you have a story about a pet that's gone above and beyond? Maybe your dog once alerted you to danger, or your cat did something that amazed you. Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to feature some of them in an upcoming video. Let's celebrate the incredible things our animal companions do for us every day. Shadow's journey isn't just his own. It's a reminder that heroes come in all shapes, sizes, and species. So, as you go about your day, think about how you can see the extraordinary in the ordinary, whether it's in the animals around you, the people you meet, or even in yourself. Because, as Shadow taught us, sometimes the most surprising heroes are the ones we least expect. Thank you for watching and for being part of our community. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep these inspiring stories alive. And remember, whether it's a four-legged hero like Shadow or the kindness you show to others, every act of courage and compassion makes the world a better place. We'll see you in the next video.